It was a quiet Thursday night, and I was driving back from visiting a friend in the next town over. The trip wasn't supposed to take long, but I must have underestimated how low my tank was. Out in the middle of nowhere, my car sputtered and died. Just my luck, dead on a dark stretch of road with no signal. I got out to check my phone, walking a few steps to try for better reception. That's when I saw headlights in the distance. A car slowed down, its hazard lights blinking, and pulled up right behind mine. I felt a weird mix of relief and hesitation. The guy who got out was wearing what looked like a police uniform. Dark pants, a belt full of gear, and a badge glinting under the car's lights. "Evening, sir. Need some help?" he said, flashing a big smile. He looked legit, but something about the way he carried himself didn't sit right. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, and his patrol car didn't look like the standard ones I'd seen before. No markings, just a regular sedan with flashing lights stuck to the dash. Still, I was desperate, so I nodded. "My car ran out of gas," I said, trying to sound calm. "Well, let's get you sorted," he replied. "I'll just need to see your license and registration for, record purposes." I handed them over without thinking, but as soon as he took my wallet, he flipped through it longer than necessary, his eyes lingering on my cash. "All right," he said, tucking my license into his pocket. "Here's the deal. There's a gas station about 10 miles down, but they won't take cards this late. I can give you a ride to the bank, so you can pull out cash and we'll sort this out." That's when it clicked. Why would a cop be so interested in my money? And why didn't he offer to call for roadside assistance? My stomach sank, and I tried to keep my cool. I don't think I should leave my car here," I stammered. "What if someone hits it? Can't you just call for backup or a tow truck or something?" His face hardened, the smile fading. "Listen, I'm doing you a favor here. You want my help or not?" His tone was sharp now, almost annoyed. My heart was pounding, and everything in me screamed to say no. "No thanks," I said, stepping back toward my car. "I'll figure it out." There was a tense pause before he shrugged and tossed my wallet into the passenger seat of my car. "Suit yourself," he said, heading back to his unmarked car. Without another word, he drove off, the flashing lights disappearing into the night. I stood there, shaken. Something told me I'd just avoided a trap. When I finally got signal and called for a tow, the operator confirmed what I was afraid of. There were no patrol officers in the area that night. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. What if I'd gotten into that car? What would have happened? Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the fake smile, the way his tone shifted, and I don't really remember how late it was when it all started, but the sun had already dipped below the horizon, and I was stuck in the middle of nowhere. My car had run out of gas on this back road that felt like it hadn't seen a car in years. There wasn't much choice. I had to walk. The nearest town was a couple of miles away, and my phone had no signal. Great, right? About 20 minutes into my walk, I heard the faint sound of wheels on gravel behind me. At first, I thought it was a car, and I turned, relieved. But no, just a guy on a bicycle, pedaling up the hill toward me. He was wearing a reflective vest, one of those bright neon ones, and a baseball cap. I figured he was a local, maybe out for a late ride or something. "Hey there," he called out as he slowed down next to me. "Need a hand?" I was hesitant at first. Strangers and all that. But he seemed harmless enough. I told him my car was out of gas, and he said there was a gas station a few miles up the road. He offered to guide me there since he was heading that way. I thought, why not? It was better than walking alone in the dark. At first, it was fine. We chatted a bit, where I was from, where I was headed. But then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Does anyone know you're out here?" The question threw me. I tried to brush it off, saying something like, "Yeah, a couple of people." But the way he asked it, it didn't feel right. There was something in his tone, like he was weighing my answer. He kept pedaling slowly beside me, and the next thing he asked was even weirder. "If you didn't show up tonight, how long do you think it'd take for someone to notice?" I felt my stomach tighten. Who asks that? I laughed it off, trying to hide how uneasy I was. but I could feel my palms getting sweaty. My gut was screaming at me that something was wrong. Still, I didn't want to show it, so I just kept walking, answering his questions as vaguely as I could. Then I saw it, a flicker of light in the distance. It looked like the glow of a gas station, maybe a diner or a house. Whatever it was, it meant people. I mumbled something about needing to hurry and picked up my pace. The guy didn't follow me at first, just stayed on his bike, watching. But then I heard him calling out, "Hey, wait up. You're going the wrong way." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran toward the lights like my life depended on it. When I finally got there, I stumbled into the gas station, breathless, and looked back down the road. The cyclist was gone. I told the guy working there what had happened, but he just shrugged it off, saying people around here were a bit odd. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I hadn't seen those lights when I did, this story might have had a very different ending. I stayed in the gas station for a while, pretending to browse the shelves while my heart settled back into my chest. The fluorescent lights felt like the safest thing I'd ever seen, and the faint hum of the cooler in the back was oddly comforting. The guy behind the counter, maybe in his late 40s, was flipping through a magazine. He barely looked up when I walked in, but eventually, I worked up the nerve to tell him about the cyclist. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I kept it light, just mentioned how the guy had asked some strange questions and made me feel a little uneasy. "Cyclist, huh," he said, scratching his chin like he was trying to think. "Don't see too many out here this late. What kind of questions?" When I repeated what the cyclist had asked me, about whether anyone knew where I was, the guy's expression changed. His easygoing demeanor stiffened just a little, and he leaned over the counter. "You sure he didn't follow you in here?" I shook my head, glancing out the window. The road was empty, just the shadows of trees swaying under the station's floodlights. But now my paranoia was kicking into overdrive. What if he had followed me? The attendant didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stared past me toward the window like he was expecting someone to show up. Then he sighed and leaned back against the counter. "Look, it's probably nothing. But folks around here, they talk. Weird stuff happens on these back roads. I'd stick to the main highways if I were you." That wasn't exactly comforting. I asked what he meant, but he just waved it off. Like I said, probably nothing. "You're lucky you saw the station lights when you did, though. Not much else around here for miles." He tossed me a cheap gas can from behind the counter, and I paid for it without saying much more. My nerves were shot, and I just wanted to get back to my car. Heading back out, I realized how dark it was. The lights from the station barely reached the edges of the parking lot, and beyond that, it was pitch black. I took a deep breath, clutching the gas can like it was some kind of shield, and started walking back toward my car. Every crunch of gravel under my boots made me jump. About halfway back, I heard it again, that soft hum of bike tires on gravel. My chest tightened, and I froze, straining to hear more. For a second, I thought maybe it was just my imagination, but then the sound grew louder. I turned around, and there he was, the cyclist, silhouetted in the faint glow of the moon. He wasn't pedaling toward me, though. He just sat there, still as a statue, watching. My throat went dry. I managed to croak out, "Hey man, what's up?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head, like he was trying to figure me out. I didn't wait for him to say anything. My legs moved on their own, and I broke into a full sprint toward my car. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could think about was getting the hell out of there. The gas can banged against my leg with every step, but I didn't stop until I reached the car. When I got there, I fumbled with the gas cap, spilling half the fuel in my panic. My hands were shaking so bad that it took me 3 tries to get the nozzle in. The whole time, I kept glancing back up the road, expecting to see him pedaling toward me. But the road stayed empty. Once I had enough gas in the tank, I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The engine sputtered a little before roaring to life, and I wasted no time turning the car around. As I sped back toward the gas station to get to the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my stomach dropped. The cyclist was standing in the middle of the road, right where my car had been parked. He wasn't on his bike anymore, just standing there, staring after me. By the time I made it to the gas station, I was shaking so badly I could barely park. I ran inside and told the attendant what had happened. He didn't seem surprised, just gave me this grim look and said, "Yeah, you're not the first to tell me something like that." I pressed him for more, but he just shrugged. "People say they see things out here, guys like him. Sometimes they're just locals, but sometimes, who knows? Some of these roads are older than the towns themselves. Weird stuff lingers, you know." I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about how close he'd been, how he just stood there like he was waiting for something. What if I hadn't seen the lights? What if I'd stopped to talk to him again? Those thoughts still haunt me. Weeks later, I mentioned the story to a friend who grew up in the area. His face went pale, and he told me about a rumor he'd heard, a man who used to cycle those roads years ago. They found his body after he'd been hit by a car late at night, right around where my car had broken down. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or whatever, but here's the thing. When I got my car cleaned a few days later, I found something wedged under the passenger seat. It was a tiny strip of reflective fabric. It all started on a cold evening. I was driving back from a weekend trip, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. You know those stretches of highway where it feels like civilization forgot about them? Yeah, one of those. My gas gauge had been flirting with empty for miles, and just my luck, the car sputtered to a stop right as I spotted a faded sign for a gas station 15 miles away. I was kicking myself for not filling up earlier, standing there on the side of the road with no cell service. Just as I started considering whether I should walk or wait for some good Samaritan, headlights appeared in the distance. It was an old sedan, the kind that looked like it had 100 stories to tell. The car slowed down, and a woman rolled down the window. She looked to be in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, with curly hair and a warm, motherly smile. "Need a lift to the gas station?" she asked. I hesitated for a second, but the thought of walking miles in the dark convinced me. I grabbed my empty gas can, thanked her, and got into the passenger seat. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. She introduced herself as Laura, and we chatted about harmless stuff, the weather, where I was heading, and how deserted this highway was. But a few miles into the ride, her questions started getting weird. "So, you traveling alone?" she asked, glancing at me a little too intently. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep it casual. "Just me." She smiled, but it didn't feel friendly anymore. "No one waiting for you back home?" That's when the first alarm bell went off in my head. Who asks that kind of thing to a total stranger? I laughed it off nervously and mumbled something about friends expecting me back later. She didn't say anything for a moment, just kept driving, her hands gripping the wheel tighter than before. The gas station wasn't supposed to be more than 10 miles down the road, but we'd been driving for at least 15. When I mentioned it, she shrugged. "Oh, I must have taken a wrong turn," she said, but she didn't seem in any hurry to fix it. I started to feel trapped, like I'd made a huge mistake. The highway was pitch black, and there wasn't another car in sight. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were no door handles on the inside of the passenger door. "Hey, you mind pulling over for a sec?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. Instead, she started asking even creepier questions. "Do you live alone? Anyone know where you are right now?" My heart was pounding. Every part of me was screaming to get out of that car, but we were in the middle of nowhere. I didn't want to jump and risk breaking something. I decided to wait for a chance, any chance, to make a move. Finally, we came to a stop at a four-way intersection. As soon as the car slowed down, I yanked at the lock, which thankfully popped open. Without thinking, I threw the door open and jumped out, landing hard on the gravel shoulder. I scrambled to my feet as she shouted something out the window, but I didn't stick around to hear it. Another car was approaching in the distance, and I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms like a maniac. The driver, a middle-aged guy in a pickup truck, stopped and let me in. I barely managed to explain what had happened before bursting into a shaky mix of relief and panic. When I turned around to point out the woman's car, it was gone. We made it to the gas station, and I used the payphone to call a friend to come get me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I just narrowly escaped something awful. To this day, I wonder what her intentions were. Was she planning to hurt me? Rob me? Worse? I filed a report with the local police, but as far as I know, they never found her. All I know is,